people who got fired on the first day of the job. What happened? Not me, but happened when I was working at McDonald's. New guy came in, and when he saw that we were trashing patties if they had been sitting too long, he ate one. Then he started just eating them from the supply. Dude must have inhaled 10, 12 patties over a couple hours after repeatedly being told to stop. Eventually, he started making himself a burger with the buns and eating it as well. Got fired first day on the job. I'm still convinced he had no real plans of working and just wanted to see how many free burgers he could eat before getting canned. Janitor job at a hospital, cleaning bathrooms in the patients' rooms. An old lady laying in her bed called me over and said she was born in Germany and she'd learned to speak English but couldn't read it very well. She had a get well card from someone and asked me to read the poem inside. I did. Someone reported me because I wasn't supposed to interact with patients. Got fired before lunch. I kind of inadvertently got a guy fired on his first day. I was working at a factory job. I had been there a couple years at this point. They had just hired a new batch of people. One of the people they just hired, let's call him Ed, I knew from school. He was a strange dude. He always had an off-putting smile on his face, like he just farted and is waiting for you to smell it. He also thought being friendly meant punching your arm, which always was annoying to me. I think he wanted to be friends in school, but it just didn't really happen. We were cordial when we met in public, though. Anyway, Ed gets hired. He sees me and comes over to talk for a bit. When he walks off, my supervisor pulls me to the side and says, "If that guy messes with you, let me know." Okay. Weird, right? Later that day, he's being trained at a machine behind me. We were running different parts, and mine runs slower. He decides that means I suck or something. He walks up behind me, slaps the back of my head, hard enough my hat goes flying off, and yells, "Hurry up, slowpoke!" My job was working with torches, so needless to say that. Me off. At lunchtime, I pulled the supervisor to the side and let him know what happened, and that it was dangerous since I'm handling dangerous equipment. He tells me he will take care of it. I come back from lunch, and Ed is being escorted out of the building. Come to find out, Ed thought it would be cool to brag to my supervisor that he used to kick in high school all the time. As far as I knew, we were cool. I had no idea that he told them anything of the sort because it didn't happen. So, when I complained, he was instantly fired. They were protecting me from my high school bully that I didn't even know existed. They called me and told me I was let go for not showing up on my first day, which was a surprise for me since at no point after the interview had I been told that I'd been hired. Not me, but a kid where I used to work was chosen the day he started for a random drug test. They did these once every few months. He said, "No problem," clocked out, and never returned. Edit. Holy sh! I did not expect this to explode. If I could, I'd thank that kid for giving me my highest comment. Anyway, here is more information regarding this if you're curious. I am from Michigan, and this was about 5 years ago at a small automotive factory. They make foam for various internal car parts. They do drug test upon hiring. I'm guessing that kid passed initially. The random drug testing was done very sporadically. The first 1.5 years I worked there, they didn't do it at all. When they started back up, they did it once a month for several months, switched to once every 3 months, stopped again for maybe 6 months, then one more round before stopping until I left, which was another 6, 8 months. The owner also had a soft spot for anyone's sob story, so he rehired previously fired employees all the time. One kid was literally on his 4th go there. Other times, he knew people were high drunk, so he'd just ask them to leave, get sober, and come back when they were clean. He also bailed several employees out of jail for drug-related incidents. That place was pretty foo-ed. I'm glad I left. I'm a developer. We hired a guy who did an amazing interview. He really seemed to know his stuff and was clearly very intelligent and capable. On his first day, he saw some old code in a shitty legacy app which wasn't great, and he went fooing apeshit. Like, began ranting at his desk, then stood up from his desk and started shouting at his screen, then started verbally abusing the developer he thought had written the code. He hadn't. The other developer just sat and took the abuse calmly and tried to explain it wasn't his code. And anyway, we knew it was old and poorly written, but there was no plan for the team to rebuild it, etc. But it was futile, and he barely got a word in with the other guy just shouting him down in an endless tirade. He had a full meltdown and was beyond civilized conversation. Project manager had to intervene and have an emergency meeting with the MD and the developer. They mutually agreed he wasn't right for the company. The guy eventually said he had Asperger's and had left many jobs for the same reason. I got a seizure while serving someone at a new restaurant. It was my first of a 3-day trial period, so I don't think I was technically on the books yet. Needless to say, they never called me back. I got into a fist fight with the owner's son. In my defense, he started it. Used to work at a factory that made food stuff. Guy I was trained with fell into a big vat of wet ingredients that was about to be heated up. Had I not looked behind me, he would have died. The boss went to the hospital to tell him he was fired, but they were giving him some extra pay in his check. Not me, but there's a story on Reddit about a teenage kid who got fired on his first day of work at the supermarket for eating all the skin off the rotisserie chickens. Just started a new job, and a guy on my training group on the first day started offering people LSD. He didn't have a second day. Went in for my first day, and the executives are apparently at the building talking to my manager, who was going to get me going. Found out within 5 minutes the company got bought out and we were all fired. Went through drug tests and interviews for nothing. I got touched in the balls for nothing, stupid physicals. Phew that place. Edit. My highest comment is about getting fired and doctor touching balls. Edit 2. Shh, B is okay. No, it wasn't. Edit 3. Apparently people want to know more, so my cousin and my uncle worked there as customer service inside sales, which was the position I was going for. My uncle a driver. I went in all smiles saying hi to my uncle and cousin, casually walking into an awkward silence. Found out what was happening and bam told to go home, since I didn't work there for at least a week or month. I didn't figure I qualified for severance pay. The touching of the balls was to check for hernias. I was a hostess at Applebee's for a day once. I was abusing a table and dropped a cup and whispered, "Shh." They never even told me that they fired me. I found out by going into work the next day to see me not on the schedule. I tried to talk to managers and everything, no one would tell me that I was fired. It was like a bad breakup with mind games, and eventually, I had to force myself into the GM's office and made him explain to me what was going on. Shadiest. Shh. Ever. I almost got fired at Subway for putting too many olives on subs. For the record, it was 6 olives per foot long and 3 per 6 inch. Anyone knows how ridiculously stingy that is. Also, if they wanted extra olives, they had to pay, and you were allowed to give double that. And that's it. I pleaded to keep my job and only followed the olive rule when the manager was around, though. I piled them high for customers I liked. Edit. I should say it was the owner, since it's a franchise, not the manager who was strict about this. The manager had to enforce the rules, but even she bent them. The store actually switched owners while I was working there, and the second one was much more lenient. Thank God. And let us put a reasonable amount of olives on. I got a job as a waiter at an Australian-themed steakhouse. No, not that one. They had me buy construction boots as part of their uniform, and a pair of black shorts totaling $50. I had never worked as a waiter before, so they had me shadow one of their waitresses. I followed her for drink orders at 2 tables, and then she told the boss it wasn't going to work out. No idea what happened, and that was my last $50. In retrospect, that place just screams, "You don't want to work here." But I'm still mad about it a decade and a half later. Lost balance of the serving tray and spilled hot soup all over the owner. I got hired as an independent contractor for some over-the-phone tech work. Hours were 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Okay, that's perfect. I go in and get acquainted, start taking calls, and hours go by. I'm wondering when I get lunch. Newsflash? No lunch, no breaks. Independent contractor or not, pretty sure here in the US you gotta give people some breaks and a lunch at some point in a 10-hour shift. Some kind of law about that, I feel sure. So I tell my new boss, look, I'm starving. I'm going to get something to eat. I'll be back in an hour. He said if you leave, don't bother coming back. So I left and never went back. 1. This was about 10 years ago, and not mine, but a homeboy of mine got an awesome job at a tech company out here in Cali. We're talking B+/A, level job with big name company, not more than 6 months out of college. His resume was outstanding. His interviews were amazing. And he impressed all of the directors at the handshake party. After spending a full day, literally there, he was given the offer letter. He got everything he wanted. He was given the 5 p.m. HR paperwork treatment, shown his future office, introduced to the office pool, and was formally announced through company email. He shook hands for the last time around 8 p.m. and walked out the front door to his car. My friend couldn't contain his excitement, and he did a burnout in the parking lot as he was leaving. He figured the parking lot was empty, and no one would notice. He got a call the next morning. Based upon your reckless actions last night in the parking lot, we've decided to terminate our working relationship. Worked at Pita Pit in college for a day. About halfway through my first shift, the manager asks if I have a car. I said yes. Why? He said I had to go get it and deliver for him till close, because the driver he was into called out because she was too hungover. She said this on speaker in front of like half of the people waiting in line and everyone else who was working. If I didn't, he said I was fired. He also told me I had to pay for my own gas and give all tips to him since I was still making $8.20 an hour instead of the $4.50 the drivers made plus tips. He handed me 7 bags and a list of MapQuest directions to them, 3 of the deliveries 10+ miles away, furthest being 17 miles in the middle of Fooing nowhere, Pennsylvania. that just screamed deliverance rape scene. Boss called me not even 15 minutes later, screaming at me for not making all of the deliveries yet, and said that once I came back and gave him his tips, I was fired. With 5 deliveries left to go, I said, "Phew it," and went to my friend's place with the rest of the food. I don't know if this counts, but my dad was interviewed for a job at a Dallas engineering firm in the 60s. They were up in Detroit, did a bunch of bulk interviews, processed offers on the spot. He was well qualified. It was a good offer. He gave notice at his current job at GM and packed the family up and drove down. When he showed up on the first day, they met him and said, "Well, the guys in engineering decided they didn't want to work with any non-white engineers, and they were supposed to call you 2 weeks ago and withdraw the offer." I showed up and the guy that was supposed to train me got fired. No one else was available to train me apparently, so they told me I was no longer needed. I was too young to put up a fight or ask for any alternatives. Not me, but I was working at the time. Iota had worked at a Panera when I was in college as a shift supervisor. We were looking for a new prep guy, and my manager interviewed this guy named Hennessy. No joke. I told my manager I didn't like him and not to hire him, but he did anyway. His first day he shows up and we give him some training on what to do, and he gets to work. After about 4 hours, my manager asks if he can take a minute out to go grab a new box of chips. Out of nowhere, the guy snaps and says, "Bitch, you don't know me. I'm from the hood." My manager, without skipping a beat, says, "Yay, and I'm from management leave." Fired him on the spot. I got this. When I was 17, I got a job at Chuck E. Cheese. I worked the front door, and once an hour I had to put on the Chucky costume and parade around the place. Here's the deal with those. Kids are DIS. They kept constantly running up to me and hugging me and punching me in the crotch. After about 5 hours of this, I'd had enough. I purposely didn't attach the head to the body. It was supposed to button into place. So after the 20th or so time being nut-checked, I had enough. I backed up, did a stupid little dance, grabbed my headpiece and slowly began to twist it around my head. The kids started to freak. Some screamed, some cried. Parents started protesting. The older kids started laughing. The attendant who was with me fell out in laughter. I thought it was hilarious. However, the restaurant manager who hired me didn't think it was that funny. I got ushered out the back door and banned from that particular Chuck E. Cheese. Do I think it was worth it? Hell, yes I do. First job ever at Burger King. Bored off my arse on the tills on day 1, and this party of drunk girls come in and start flirting with me and messing around asking what they can have for free. I told them nothing. My manager was literally right behind me. But once he cleared off, I just took a whole load of burgers and made 6 ice cream sundaes. So anyway, I took them over to their table to get some loving, and I mentioned that I was new and my manager was a bit of a twat, which is why I didn't do it earlier. Imagine my delight when after flirting for 5 minutes, I saw him sitting down on the table behind them, on his break, staring at me like I had just raped his guinea pig. I just walked straight downstairs and out the door. Didn't even wait to get fired. I wasn't fired on the first day, but I saw someone get fired. I got a job working in a grocery warehouse, driving a forklift in the freezer section. This freezer was supposed to be kept at minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit, which means they actually kept it a little colder. I once saw it at minus 46 degrees on a rainy day. Day 1, as I'm getting a brief tour around the place by a rotund middle management fellow, we see a group emerge from the freezer. One guy in the middle clutching his mouth, tears in his eyes. You know when kids dare each other to stick their tongues onto poles during winter? This guy did that of his own volition, in this incredibly cold room, and had to wait until someone stumbled upon him for rescue. He was fired on the spot. A guy showed up on his first day, went through orientation, then out for beers with his boss and a few others. His boss was talking about his 16-year-old girl, and the new guy straight-faced said, "Is she hot?" This was a 24-plus-year-old dude. His first day was his last. When I was in between jobs and early in my tech career, I took some temporary work. Among this work was a manufacturing outfit that needed a few thousand records digitized. Upon the early part of my discovery, I found that they already had most of this data in a giant flat file, and were bringing in only 2 new pieces of unique data. I found a few correlation points with just a glance and immediately started scripting. It took around 4 hours to get my script ready, and then all I had to do was enter 2 pieces of unique info per record, and the script would take care of the rest. This was going to be a huge time saver, likely cutting the 5-day job to 1.5 or 2 days. I would be paid the same either way, and would be out of their hair days early, so I figured it was a win-win. The lady in charge of watching me asked me right after lunch on that first day how many records I had completed so far, and I answered her honestly. I had done 4 records, the ones I had tested my script against, but was going to blast through hundreds before that business day was done. I went back to the desk and computer they had provided me, and started banging through the stack of records. After I had only done about 24 of them, a security type showed up and escorted me out while muttering something about non-performance. I asked to be given 3 minutes to show my script to anyone that cared, but they were not interested at all. I was marched out the side door and was never again used by that temp agency. Those folks just did not understand what I was doing or how powerful scripting is. All they knew was that I spent the morning doing something other than the mind-numbing data entry that they had hired me for. I got hired through a temp service to work at the local phone company. No problem, as I had done tons of telemarketing before and figured it would be working on the billing customer service end. Nope. First day, they had me on the phone with linemen who were up a telephone pole somewhere halfway across the country asking me which wire to cut. I had no clue what I was doing and had a mini meltdown talking to my supervisor. She asked me how I could possibly not know what I was doing when I had clearly passed the test to get the job. My response was, "Test? What test?" Turns out the temp agency was supposed to give any and all applicants a test to see if they had the experience necessary to do the job. I had a call from the temp agency telling me I was fired before I got home that day. Not me, but a guy I knew. I work in the oil field. New guy comes in on night shift. I tell him to go check the giant oil tank to see how full it is. It's a tank as big as a house. He looks down inside it and uses his FU-ing lighter to get light. Nobody was killed. His job was eliminated for safety reasons. Not me, but some recent graduates. So I worked on Wall Street and we had a rigorous hiring process. Almost 3-4 rounds for an entry-level MES position. So it took about 6-8 weeks to find someone, and he started. After the introduction, he started training, and mind you, we stay fewing late 12-hour shifts. So he's training nonstop for the day, and slowly everyone is trickling out. I'm assuming he was the last person to leave because when I came in, I saw an email around midnight saying, "Y'all mother foo heirs are crazy, and this place will kill you all in a month. I'm out." Talk of the floor for about a month, and ironically, some people quit because he was actually right. I'll never forget it. New girl stretched her 1-hour lunch break to 2.5 hours on the very first day. She apologized and said she was shopping, and the lines were long. We accepted her apology and told her we hoped the unemployment lines were not as long and showed her the door. Obligatory, not me, but we had someone come in and interview for a data entry and research job one time. I have no idea how she passed the typing test, but that's basically the only prerequisite to getting this job, a certain amount of words per minute. I have no idea how she passed the test because we soon found out she did not know about the internet. Like on the first day of the job, okay, just search this in Google and Google? Yeah, a website? Website? My boss was dumbfounded. She was in the office long enough to be introduced to people and sat down at her desk. Maybe 2-3 hours tops. This was probably around 2005 or so. It wasn't some elderly lady. Jimmy John's when I was 16. I knew that earrings were not allowed, let alone plugs. I went out and bought flesh-colored plugs, and since my ears weren't too stretched, they are not anymore, glad I grew out of that phase, I thought it would be acceptable. Anyway, the manager wasn't too thrilled when I told her I didn't want to take them out, because I didn't want my holes to close up, and she fired me on the spot. Edit. Moral of the story, kids, don't be a rebel without a cause. Cleaned houses for old people, fired up one of their vacuum cleaners. It made a sound like a siren, so I jokingly yelled, "The Germans are coming!" A common response for me. I'm from a country previously occupied by Germans. The old people were old enough. My wife got a job at Bob Evans when she was a teenager. Her first customer was an older man and apparently a regular. The customer ordered a black coffee, so my wife brought him a black coffee. Apparently, black coffee meant something totally different to the codger because he wanted it with 2 creams and a sugar. His response to this adversity was, unlike a normal person who would ask for what they really want, to throw the cup of coffee at my wife. Her entirely reasonable response was to walk away. Her manager fired her on the spot. Apparently, she was supposed to ask the guy what was wrong in response to getting the coffee thrown at her. It was after my second day, but I once got a kitchen job in addition to the one I already had. So during the transition period, I was scheduled for a lot of double shifts between both jobs. After my second shift, I traded a shift with a coworker friend to make things easier. Next I heard, the restaurant owner-manager wrote me off the schedule because he wrote the schedule to make it work with my other job, and the schedule still got changed. Was 17 and kicked out of school, so I decided to get a job at telemarketing company Cold, calling people to try to sell them chimney cleaning services, offering the first cleaning for free. It was extremely awkward speaking to those people on the phone and trying to offer something so obscure. So after the first 5, I just pretended to be speaking to people on the other line while I was actually talking to a dial tone. Did this for about 3 hours. I went to the bathroom. On my way back to my desk, the supervisor stopped me and said, "Hey, I don't think that this job is for you. Not sure how they might have known. Looking back, I understand why he looked at me funny if I asked I would be paid for the 3 hours that worked. First day of training at an office supplies retailer. Things to note: I was super nervous and hopped up on caffeine, probably related. Extremely addicted to cigarettes. I have next to zero willpower whenever a craving hits. And I have pretty bad social anxiety. The combination of these qualities served as a catalyst for the following incident. A couple hours into the shift, all of the managers and trainers were occupied by a sudden influx of customers. It was during back-to-school season, so the store was busier than usual, and I was left alone in the break room and told to read some training modules on the computer. After reading one or two, I get hit by a craving to smoke, probably amplified by the caffeine in my system. I noticed a door just outside the break room and figured it must be the employee entrance, so I decided I'd just take a puff or two just outside, not intending to be gone for more than a few minutes. As I go to open the door, the FU-ing fire alarm goes off in the whole store. The employees at this particular establishment all wear earpieces connected to radios, and I immediately heard a cacophony of outrage and bewilderment explode inside my head. I still had the door propped open with my arm and just sort of stood there completely frozen, listening to the angry yelling of people I just met in one ear, and the shrill, incessant screech of the alarm in the other. At that point, something primal erupted within me, and I went full flight-or-fight mode. I ripped the radio off my belt, dropped it on the ground, and made a break for it. I threw the door wide open and booked it out across the back parking lot at a full sprint. The far edge of the lot is bordered by tall hedges, and as I reached them, I looked back and saw two managers standing outside the door behind me, calling something out that I couldn't quite hear. After pausing only a moment, I plunged into the bushes and vanished, never to return. They didn't try to contact me again either. I can only imagine what they thought had happened. I had a worthless piece of SHT roommate who I got to witness get fired. His first day of work washing dishes at a Tex-Mex place. He called in because he missed the bus. There was going to be a bus 30 minutes later, but he thought it better to completely miss his first day than to be at all late. The next day, the same SHT happened exactly as the first day, except that he was then invited to not bother ever coming in. I worked at a summer camp this big country club near my house had as a head counselor. We had the kids all running around this small aerobics room blowing off steam since it was raining outside. The clock in this aerobics room was broken, so we couldn't tell the time. I was told by the camp director to take a specific child to her office at exactly 1 p.m. so they could be given a medication they needed. So I very quickly pulled out my phone, glanced at the time, and put it away. At the end of the day, I was pulled into the director's office and told I was being fired because someone reported they saw me using a phone, and the camp had a strict policy about texting while on the job. No chance to explain myself. I was just told I was fired and to leave. I took off my camp shirt, placed it on her desk, said, "Have a nice day," and never looked back. Poetic justice. That camp went out of business a few months later, a combination of going bankrupt and not being able to find employees. Interned at some startup, got hired because of my multimedia skills, can help in a number of areas. I offered to make a musical sting for their company logo. I spent an hour on it, and then showed the manager and the owner. They loved it. Lovely. Later that night, I said to the manager, "So like, if you use this, do I make any money off it?" The manager guy goes, "Haha, yeah, you'll get your million." I respond with, "Actually, my quote is 1.25 million." And we laughed and we laughed. Good times. Then he left and I did some more work, learning some equipment and such. I was the last person in the office on my first day. Next morning, my internship coordinator calls me up, says, "What happened?" I call back, huh? I'm told that I demanded money and made threats of litigation and that I was fired. I mean, maybe I shouldn't have asked about money, but I'd never interned anywhere before. And he started the joke about money. Yeah, I have no idea what the hell happened in that guy's head that night. Not me, but I got to witness most of this. Working at a grain mill, overnights, easy job. Fill up 2,000 pounds totes with oats or grain and seal them up and put them on a pallet for shipping. Boring job, 12-hour shifts. We stopped for lunch at midnight-ish. New guy was a kid I went to high school with, few years younger than me, always getting in trouble, and there is probably about a dozen stories about the SHT he got into. We'll call him Peter. Peter was dancing and laughing all shift, seemed to enjoy the job. Lots of standing around waiting for feed to fill. Come lunchtime, Peter disappeared. Everyone figured he went to smoke or hadn't taken his break yet. Comes back around 45 minutes after everyone else. Instantly know something is up. Peter is now quiet and basically hiding office. Gets a phone call from his sister about an hour after he comes back. Whatever, kid's not singing anymore and being distracting. 2 hours later, Peter starts watching the clock hard, and the doors. Gets really fidgety every time the supervisor walks past. Supervisor asks, "What's up with Peter?" Everyone shrugs. New guy probably not used to nights. 30 minutes before shift is over, supervisor gets a call. Police officers are at the plant and want to speak with him. Confused to all hell, supervisor goes and talks to them, then escorts them into the plant. Soon as Peter sees the cops, he runs. Cops chase him, tackle him, and handcuff him. Supervisor ushers the rest of us away and back to our jobs to prepare for turnover and next shift. Turns out Peter was having a fight with his family. During his lunch break, he took the truck he drove to work, which it turns out he basically stole from his uncle, took the keys and left without asking to borrow it, and drove to a small town about 15 miles away, sideswiped his cousin's car on purpose, and drove back to the grain mill to finish his lunch. Never punched out. Company policy is to punch out if you leave the gate, and cameras have him leaving and coming back with paint scratched on the side of his car. Cousin was apparently awake and ran out to see his car and recognized the truck driving away, called the cops. Cops checked his house looking for him, to which was why his sister called the plant to inform Peter the cops were looking for him. Don't know if this qualifies because I'm not totally sure I ever had the job. So I was looking for work in the city I was about to relocate to. I landed an interview with a Fortune 500 retailer. They called, we talked, and they offered me the job right then. Great! I show up for my first day, and I'm met with confused looks. They don't have anybody scheduled for training that day. They have me fill out some paperwork with a promise I'll get a call back. A week later, I'm rescheduled for training. I go back, I meet a few of the other new people I'm going to be trained with as we're waiting for them to get us set up in the system. They call only me back. They can't find the code that was the position that I was hired for, which is a problem because that's how their system assigns employee ID codes. I fill out the paperwork yet again, with another promise of a call. They called a little more than a week later and ask if I'm still interested in the job. No thanks. For context of time, I waited in their administrative lobby for about 30 minutes. The first time and 1/2 HRs the second time I went, with the phone calls being between every week and a half. I waited over 3 weeks with 3 HRs in person waiting for release. Still don't know if I ever had it or not. Oh boy, I have a sad one. Not me, actually. My brother, when he was 18 or 19, was doing this police explorers thing, where young adults interested in law enforcement ride along with cops. One day they had him go to various places and try to buy alcohol, which is illegal here in the States until you're 21. Anyway, their day was almost over, so the cop he was riding with let him go for some pizza. They took him to a mom-and-pop kind of pizza restaurant, real small business, and he ordered a beer. The waitress served him without hesitation, so my brother motioned for the officer to come inside. He had been sitting out in his car. The officer was in uniform. My brother was not. Anyway, when she realizes what's happening, this young waitress just starts crying in the middle of the restaurant. Through sobs, she exclaimed, "It's my first day! I didn't know, I'm so sorry." The officer decided not to revoke the restaurant's liquor license, but the girl lost her job. My brother came home that day laden with guilt and quit doing police explorers shortly thereafter. Didn't get fired, but did quit and walk out after 5 minutes. They told me it was a simple minimal training data entry job. Great for me as a college student at the time. I walked in the first day for training and the manager began explaining how Kirby vacuums sell themselves. I noped the FU out of there. To the FU. Worked in a kitchen when I was 14. First shift, I got offered a Coke. I said yes, not realizing it was Coke the drug and not Coca-Cola Classic. Silly me. I wasn't exactly fired. We came to a mutual agreement that it just wasn't working out. Not me, but a friend got a job as one of those canvassers, the people who stand on street corners asking for donations to a cause. Apparently, you go work for a canvasser company who contracts for a good cause, e.g. the Red Cross or whatever. They put you out on a corner, and you have to raise a certain amount of donations to stay employed. That amount happens to be exactly the same as the hourly wage X the hours worked. So, if you get $10 an hour for an 8-hour day, you're required to raise $80. As an aside, this means you probably shouldn't donate through one of those people. If one of them raises $90 for, say, cancer research, only $10 has any chance to go to the actual research fund. Probably less, since presumably the company takes a cut. Anyway, it turns out that begging people for money on the street is a skill, and she didn't have it. Apparently, most people fail out in the first few days, and she was no exception. I spent the morning of my first and only day at a medical equipment calibration facility being introduced to the whole team. A very nice woman spent time taking me around the building, and we wound up having small talk with dozens of people from upper management to the warehouse guys. We returned to our desks, and a very cute guy started talking to me. I noticed someone in an office observing this interaction. She called the nice lady into her office. The nice lady told me that was enough for the day, and that we would get a fresh start the next morning. When I got home, there was a call from HR telling me not to come back. I never got an explanation. I think the woman in the office liked the cute guy and got jealous. I got fired before my first day. I was hired by the Charlotte Public Library for a part-time job. I was incredibly excited because I grew up using the city's library system, even volunteered there for a time, and I thought this job would allow me to build a career with them. Unfortunately, I got hired in the midst of a budget crisis, so I got a call the day before I was meant to start working and told they couldn't afford to hire me. I fired a guy once on his first day. After all the paperwork was signed, etc., I said, "We want to put you on Friday at X time." He said that would be great. The Thursday before he calls me and says he just got invited to a party, so he can't come into work the following day. A little hint for some of you, this is not a good first impression. I said that he had already agreed to the shift a week ago, so if he wants to have a job, then he will come to work when he's scheduled. He responded with, "And I'm not making this up, but I really want to go to that party." I said, "I really want my staff to show up when they're scheduled and not leave me high and dry with no notice." He said, "Well, I'm still going to come in for my Saturday shift." I said, "If you want a job, you come in for all your shifts unless it's absolutely necessary." Shocked and apparently surprised, he said okay. The following day, someone I have never met calls me and says, "My friend Dipshit is sick and can't come in tonight, but he will be in tomorrow." I said, "Tell Dipshit we don't need him at all this weekend." His friend said okay and hung up. The best part is about a month later, Dipshit actually comes back into my office and says, "You haven't called me with another schedule." He didn't even come in right away. He waits a fewing month to try this stunt. I am not really sure if you would even call that firing him since we never actually paid him, but it was quite strange. I was in Jamba Juice years ago, and some kid walked in and asked for a job application. One of the employees behind the counter handed him one, and the kid proceeded to ask, "Do you guys drug test?" The employee replied, "Yeah." The kid was silent for a few seconds, then let out a pathetic "oh" and placed the application down on the counter and walked out. I laughed my ass off. I started working part-time last Christmas at a large supermarket chain, and they were hiring pretty much anyone, and so didn't have uniforms for everyone. So they ended up giving us aprons with the supermarket's name at the front, and to wear it until they get our uniforms. There was this one guy that during the G Group interview went on about how he was turning his life around, was heavily influenced by drugs when he was younger, and was starting his own business on the side, sounded like a pyramid scheme, refused to wear the apron as he doesn't want to wear that gay shit. He was promptly fired. A guy on my basic training for the military broke on the first day. At like 4 a.m. when he was supposed to do fire picket, he said to the guy he was relieving, "Today is my birthday. Nobody here will know or care," like all teary-eyed. He ran away back to his house, which was pretty close to the base. Explaining a dude went AWOL because his feelings were hurt would have been a lot harder if the instructors were not so weirded out by it. Technically second day, but within 24 consecutive hours counts, right? Told her. Guy got sad and went AWOL first day with the army. I got a job at GameStop. Manager who hired me told me my first shift started at 4 p.m. I showed at 3:50. Different manager was working that afternoon, told me I was actually scheduled for 2:30. Never even got to work. Got a job at a local accounting firm as an assistant. Got to lunchtime and was labeling mail to be posted, and I fell asleep at my desk. Not a defense, obviously, but I was 16 and had been bunked out of my mind for several days prior. I was at work one day, met the new guy. New guy seems normal. We broke for lunch, came back to my desk. New guy is missing. Security shows up looking for new guy. He's threatened someone's life and they're looking for him. What? I get pulled into the office to ask if I'd spoken with him. Turns out dude cut in line for the microwave over lunch. When someone confronted him, he threatened their life, getting all up in his face and pushing him in the shoulder. Now it's a running joke to tell someone, "You want to take this to the microwave?" when they say something you don't like. Lol. Fired. First day. For cutting in line at the microwave. I trained a guy at my old job, and we were watching a football game during training, and he said they should throw a flag on one of the players for excessive nigging. He didn't last longer than that one day. 15 years old in Miami, calling out owner of Cuban bakery for serving customers coffee made with sugar riddled with black ants. Rather than eat the costs of a couple pounds of sugar or just find decent Tupperware, she would tell customers who complained they were grounds. So foo Ed. The minute I spoke up, they kicked me the few out. I worked at a KFC knockoff, something like Uncle K's Chicken, and I got fired 3 hours into the job for genuinely asking if the chickens were alive when they arrived at the shop. First day at Hollister, they told me I didn't have the look and asked me to leave. Figured that would come up during the interview or the training days. At least they showed us a video on how to shoplift. Not me, but there's a guy who lives in the same apartment complex and me, and he got a job in IT for a big company. He got fired on the first day on the job for showing up in sandals.